Case 1. Anna Walshe. How does a successful, brilliant mother of three simply vanish on New Year's Day? The answer wasn't found in a confession. It was found preserved on her young son's iPad. A chilling trail of searches that revealed exactly what happens when a lifetime of lies finally collapses. New Year's Day is supposed to be a beginning, a clean page, but in a comfortable home on the Massachusetts coast, the first hours of that new year were the last of a woman's life. Her name was Anna Walshe. She was 39 years old, a mother of three young boys, and for 3 years, the people who loved her carried a question that no verdict could fully answer, because Anna was never found. Let me tell you who she was, because she was so much more than the way she left. Anna was born in Serbia and built her life in America through sheer force of will. She was sharp, ambitious, and warm. She rose to become a real estate executive, trusted with major properties, respected in rooms full of people who did not hand respect out easily. She split her weeks between Massachusetts and Washington, working, traveling, and raising 3 little boys who needed her. She was a woman in motion, a woman with a future she was already planning. And here is the part that matters most, the part investigators would only understand later. In the final days of her life, Anna was quietly getting ready to leave her marriage. She had confided to a friend that she believed her husband was headed to prison, and that she was prepared to take her children and start again. She was not a woman waiting for something to happen to her. She was a woman preparing to protect her family. The man she had married was named Brian Walshe, and an investigator learns to slow down right here, because the warning in this story was never a raised hand in front of witnesses. It was something quieter, written across the record of a whole life. Brian Walshe was a con man, not as a figure of speech, in a convicted way. He had run a scheme selling counterfeit artwork, forged pieces passed off as the real thing, taking real money from people who trusted him. On that New Year's Day, he was not a free man with a clean slate. He was under court-ordered home confinement, awaiting sentencing in that federal fraud case, facing prison and roughly $500,000 he owed in restitution. The comfortable, controlled life he had built was about to collapse. Because Brian was the beneficiary of life insurance on Anna's life, policies that prosecutors valued at as much as $2.7 million. Prosecutors said the marriage was ending, that Anna had grown close to another man in Washington, and that she was preparing to leave and take the children. And they argued that if Brian became the sole parent of those 3 children, he believed he might avoid prison altogether. In the Commonwealth's theory, a dead wife solved every problem a living one created. Now here is the story he told. When Anna did not turn up, Brian said she had kissed him goodbye before dawn and left for an emergency work trip to Washington. Nothing was wrong. But the night before, the couple had hosted a friend for a quiet New Year's Eve dinner. The friend left around 1:30 in the morning and later said there had been no sign that anything was wrong. Anna was last seen in the hours just after, and then she was simply gone. On January 4th, she was reported missing. Both her Washington employer, who realized she had never returned to work, and Brian himself filed reports that day. But his came wrapped in a false story, and investigators would soon find that almost nothing he told them held up. Because a person can lie to a detective's face, what is far harder is to lie to the quiet machine in your own home. In the dark early hours of that New Year's Day, around 5 in the morning, on his own laptop, someone began typing questions into a search bar. Not the questions of a grieving husband. Questions like, 10 ways to dispose of a dead body, if you really need to, and can you be charged with murder without a body? A plan, taking shape one keystroke at a time. And here is the detail that stays with you. Because his devices were tied to a single account, those searches were quietly preserved on another screen in that home. An iPad that belonged to one of his own young sons. The record of a mother's last hours, living on her child's tablet. Then came the ordinary receipts of an extraordinary crime. On January 2nd, captured on camera, Brian paid about $450 in cash at a hardware store for cleaning supplies and a protective suit. Over the following days, he moved between stores and towns, and between dumpsters. And when investigators traced his path to a trash transfer station in Peabody, where a dumpster from his mother's neighborhood had been hauled, the truth was waiting in the garbage. Anna's COVID vaccination card, clothing and boots matching what she was last seen wearing, a blood-stained rug from their home, a protective suit, and a hacksaw, its blade carrying DNA that matched Anna. No confession, no body, and still a trail so clear that a jury did not need one. When it finally came to trial, Brian Walshe changed his strategy. In November of 2025, he admitted to two things he could no longer deny: misleading the police and disposing of Anna's body. But he insisted he had not killed her. He claimed he had found her already dead and panicked. The jury did not believe him. In December, they convicted him of first-degree murder, and a judge sentenced him to life in prison with no possibility of parole, calling his crimes barbaric and his behavior deceitful and manipulative. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. The danger sign in Anna's story was not a single moment of violence. It was character, revealed over years. There had even been a warning spoken aloud. Years earlier, Anna had told police that Brian had threatened to kill her and a friend. No charges were ever filed, and the report slipped quietly into the past. But it was there, on the record, long before anyone thought to look. And in a courtroom, Brian Walshe had already shown the world that he would lie, forge, and steal without conscience when something stood between him and what he wanted. He told the truth about himself in the only language that never lies: his actions, long before that New Year's morning. When a person repeatedly proves they will betray trust for their own gain, the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to believe them. That is not cynicism. It is paying attention. The small betrayals are rarely the last ones. And there is a second lesson here, a gentler one. Anna's disappearance came to light because people paid attention. An employer who noticed an empty desk, friends she had trusted with the truth, investigators who refused to accept a tidy story. This case is proof of something worth holding on to. A missing body is not a missing truth. Justice does not always require remains. Sometimes it only asks that enough people care enough to keep asking why. Anna Walshe was a mother, a leader, and a woman on the very edge of her own fresh start, ended by the one person who had promised to stand beside her. Her body was never recovered. But the truth of what happened to her was, and it will outlast every lie he told to hide it. Case 2, Quitiza Holmes. What happens when a man who has already killed one wife is quietly set free? To marry again? Some people do not just walk into a room, they light it. That was Quitiza Holmes. Her family called her Tiza, and if you knew her laugh, her bright and ever-changing hair, the way she would say exactly what she thought and never once apologize for taking up space in the world. She was 45 years old, a lifelong daughter of Springfield, Massachusetts. She loved her church, her music, and the small, ordinary joys of an ordinary week. She was, above all, a woman who stood up for herself. Remember that about her. It is the truest thing there is to say. Quitiza had married a man named Kenneth Robson, and to tell you what happened to her, I have to tell you something she herself may never have fully understood, something that turns this from a private tragedy into a warning none of us can afford to ignore. But let us start with that morning. It was just before 5 o'clock on the 30th of April 2024. A 911 call came in to Springfield police. The caller identified himself. It was Kenneth Robson. He told the dispatcher he needed an ambulance because he had struck his wife with a hammer and she might already be dead. There was no intruder, no mystery. He was calling about what he himself had just done. The dispatcher told him to step outside, and he did. He surrendered without a struggle. Inside the apartment on Federal Street, officers found Quitiza gravely hurt, and they found, nearby, the hammer. There were signs that she had tried to shield herself, that in her final conscious moments, She had fought to live, and fight she did. Quitiza did not die that morning. She held on for 16 days. 16 days her family sat beside her and hoped. On the 16th of May, she was gone. When investigators spoke with Robson, he reached for an excuse. He told them he had taken drugs that were not what he expected, and that whatever had happened, the drugs had done it through him. It is a familiar move to hand the blame to something outside yourself. But a hammer is not swung by a chemical, it is swung by a hand. And here is the part that should stop all of us cold. This was not the first time Kenneth Robson had killed his wife. 40 years earlier, in 1984, Robson had been convicted in the death of another woman he had married, a woman named Joan Cusson. For that killing, he was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in state prison, and by 1995 he was released. He walked back out into the world. He married again. And Quitiza Holmes, who had done nothing but love the wrong man, paid for that release with her life. Joan Cusson's family never forgot. Through every hearing in Quitiza's case, they were there, carrying 4 decades of grief, saying aloud what the record now made undeniable. This man had already taken a wife's life once and been given the chance to do it again. In September of 2025, Kenneth Robson pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in Quitiza's death. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. At 68 years old, he will very likely die behind bars. This time, there will be no release. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. Of all the warning signs researchers have ever studied, one stands above every other. The single strongest predictor that a person will kill an intimate partner is that they have already used serious violence against one before. Not temper, not jealousy. History. A past act of violence is not something safely behind us. It is a rehearsal. Kenneth Robson told the world exactly who he was in 1984, in the plainest terms a human being can. And the deepest grief in Quitiza's story is not only what he did to her. It is that the danger was already known, already proven, already written down, and still she was left to face it alone. When a person has seriously harmed a partner before, that is not a closed chapter. It is the single most important thing anyone could know about them. Quitiza Holmes deserved a world that remembered what this man had already done. She deserved to grow old, loud and bright and unafraid, standing up for herself the way she always had. Instead, she was left to stand alone against a danger that already had a name and a history long before it ever reached her. She should not have had to. That is the part none of us can be allowed to forget. Case 3. Shana Warner. By the fall of 2018, Shana Warner was building something new. She was 48 years old, a mother who her own family said was simply the best of them, the kind of mom whose whole heart had always been set on her children. She worked alongside her father in his landscaping business, out in the open air. She loved to travel. She was engaged to be married again, to a man who was good to her, with a wedding to look forward to the following year. After a long and painful chapter, Shana was almost free of it, and almost home to the life she wanted. She was so close. To get there, she had been trying to leave her husband, Alan Warner, for the better part of a decade. This was not a sudden decision. She had filed for divorce 3 separate times, going back to 2011. The very first time, she told the court plainly why, that he had been physically and verbally abusive, and she tied it to his drug use. 3 times she reached for the door, and now, in 2018, she had filed again, and this time a hearing was finally on the calendar. She was, at last, on the verge of the ending she had fought years to reach. Alan Warner had no intention of letting her have it. And here is where this story turns, because what happened next did not come out of nowhere. It announced itself. Days before the attack, a stranger was spotted lingering on a street in Marshfield, the town where Shana was staying. Someone found him unsettling enough to call the police. When officers spoke to him, he told them he was just out collecting cans. He was wearing a camouflage rain jacket. That man was Alan Warner. He had come to town, and he was waiting. In the days that followed, he sent Shana unsettling messages and told her he would see her later. The local police knew him well. Over the years, they had had numerous encounters with him. They sensed he was circling her, looking for his moment. And yet, under the law as it stood, there was no clear basis to arrest a man for standing on a street and saying he was collecting cans. On the evening of the 24th of September, 2018, that circling ended. On Route 3A in Marshfield, Alan Warner forced his way into his wife's car. Her car left the road, and there, at the roadside, he attacked her with a ferocity meant to be certain she would not survive it. He beat her, he stabbed her, he shot her. And in the middle of that terror, Shana Warner did something extraordinary, something her family would later have to sit in a courtroom and hear. She called 911. She named the man who was hurting her, telling them it was her husband who had forced his way into her car and that she was badly hurt. Then the call broke off. When help reached Route 3A, her car sat empty with its engine still running, and Shana was in the road beside it. She was rushed to the hospital. She did not survive. Later, when the defense tried to raise doubt about who had done this to her, her own voice had already answered. What followed was almost surreal in its coldness. Alan Warner fled, setting off a manhunt that stretched across the region for nearly a full day. He abandoned his own car. Then, in the town of Whitman, he stole a flatbed truck from a paving company. The next afternoon, he came barreling the wrong way through the drive-thru of a Whitman coffee shop, crashing into the flower pots outside. A young employee who watched it happen said he was laughing. He thought it was funny. When he drove the stolen truck back toward the company he had taken it from, the police were there. 18 hours after ending his wife's life, that is who they found behind the wheel. In March of 2022, a Plymouth County jury convicted Alan Warner of first-degree murder, along with kidnapping and a string of other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. We are taught to think of stalking as a nuisance, or even, absurdly, as a kind of devotion. It is neither. Following someone, watching their home, refusing to let them go, these are among the clearest signs that a person is moving toward lethal violence. And here is what sets stalking apart from the hidden cruelties in some of these other stories. Stalking is often visible. Shana's neighbors saw a strange man on the street. The police knew exactly who he was. The danger was not a secret. It was standing in plain sight, in a camouflage jacket, claiming to collect cans. And this is the gap that failed Shana. Under the law, the police often cannot act against a man who is only standing and watching and waiting. There has to be a crime or a clear and provable threat before anyone is allowed to step in. So a danger that everyone can see is left to move freely, right up until the moment it is too late. Being seen is not the same as being stopped. So this is what her story asks of us. When someone tells you they are being followed or watched by a person they fear, do not wait for it to escalate. Take it seriously the very first time. Write it down, report it, and believe it. Stalking is not the warning before the danger. It is the danger, already at the door. Shana Warner did everything a person is ever told to do. She left, she filed, again and again. She told people she was afraid. She even named the man who was killing her, in her last call for help. She was days away from the hearing that was supposed to set her free. The threat that took her life was not lurking in shadow. It was known to the police, plain to her neighbors, visible to anyone who cared to look. She should have been protected by the sheer fact that everyone could see it coming. That she was not is the question she leaves in our hands. Case 4. Christina Mulgrave. Some victims leave us their voice. Christina Mulgrave left us her words, typed in fear, in the last minutes of her life. And those words would go on to do something no one expected. Christina was 45 years old. She had spent her life in the work of caring for other people, with a background in nursing, the kind of person who shows up for others on their worst days. She was a mother of grown children, and not long before, she had moved back to be closer to them. She had family who loved her, and a sister who knew her better than anyone. That last detail matters, because her sister had already seen what was coming and had begged Christina to get out. Christina had married a man named Craig Mulgrave in 2008, after the two met while she was traveling. It had been something of a whirlwind, but by early 2010, the relationship was deteriorating badly, and she had only recently moved back to Haverhill to be near her grown children. The danger was closing in fast. The day before she died, on the 8th of February, Christina went to her sister's house. The people closest to her were afraid for her. They had reason to be. On the afternoon of the 9th of February 2010, inside their apartment on Chestnut Street in Haverhill, the danger her family feared became real. At 3 minutes past 3 that afternoon, Christina did something that would echo far beyond that room. She picked up her phone and texted her son. In that message, she told him that Craig was threatening to kill her. She said she was scared, and she wrote the words that would one day be read aloud in a courtroom. "If I pick up the phone, he will kill me." It was a warning, and it was also a plea to her son. "Do not call me. Do not make this phone ring. Answering it could cost me my life." She was not exaggerating. She was reporting, in real time, a threat on her life. 6 minutes later, at 9 minutes past 3, she called 911. On that call, she said her husband was stabbing her. Haverhill police arrived within 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And still, it was not fast enough. As officers reached the apartment, they saw Craig Mulgrave coming out, covered in blood. He told them, in words as flat as they are chilling, that he had just killed his wife. Inside, they found Christina, barely alive. She could not be saved. At trial in 2012, Craig Mulgrave's defense argued that depression, alcohol, and drugs had clouded his mind so badly that he was not capable of the deliberation that first-degree murder requires. The jury did not accept it. They found that he had made the decision to kill, and that he had carried it out with extreme cruelty. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. But Christina's story did not end in that courtroom, and the reason is that text message. When Craig Mulgrave appealed, his lawyers fought to keep her words out of evidence. The law had long been skeptical of written statements as spontaneous ones, on the theory that writing takes thought, takes time, takes reflection. But in 2015, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court looked at what Christina had written, in terror, 6 minutes before she called for help, and ruled that her text was what the law calls an excited utterance, a statement made in the grip of a shocking event, and reliable enough to be heard. It was the first time in the state that a murdered person's text message was allowed to speak in court this way. Christina's own words, tapped out in her final minutes, helped hold her killer accountable, and built a legal bridge for every victim who would come after her. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. When a person says their partner is threatening to kill them, that sentence is not drama, and it is not a figure of speech. Explicit threats to kill are among the most serious warning signs in all of domestic violence, one of the clearest signals that a situation has turned lethal. A person who says they are going to kill their partner is not usually letting off steam. More often than we want to believe, they are telling you exactly what they intend to do. Christina Mulgrave understood exactly what was happening to her. She named it. She wrote it down. She said, in plain words, "He is going to kill me." The heartbreak of her story is not that the warning was missing. The warning was there, precise and urgent, in her own hand. So this is what she asks of us. When someone tells you, in any words, spoken or written, that they are afraid their partner will kill them, treat those words as the emergency they are. Do not soften them. Do not wait. Believe them the moment they are said. Christina Mulgrave was silenced in the space of minutes, but she had already spoken, and what she wrote refused to die with her. Her last words carried past the door of that apartment, into a courtroom, and into the law itself, making certain that the man who killed her could never erase what he had done. She could not save herself that afternoon. But she made sure the truth would outlive her. Case 5. Ersilia, Cataldo, Matarazzo. How long can a monster hide behind a perfect marriage? For 30 years, no one saw it, and the day she finally spoke the truth, she named one of the deadliest warning signs there is. In the city of Everett, Massachusetts, Ersilia Cataldo Matarazzo was one of those people who quietly hold a community together. She was 50 years old. She served her city as a member of the Board of Assessors. She was the secretary at St. Anthony's Parish, a familiar and beloved face to everyone who passed through its doors. She was a mother to 3 grown children, part of a large and loving extended family, and a second cousin to the city's own mayor. When people in Everett spoke of her, the same words came up again and again: lovely, devoted, involved. She was the kind of woman a whole community leans on without even realizing it. What that same community did not know for a very long time was what Ersilia was carrying in private. For most of a 30-year marriage to a man named Emilio Matarazzo, Ersilia kept her suffering to herself. It was only in November of 2018 that she finally began to speak it aloud. For the first time, she told the people closest to her the truth about her husband. She told them he had become violent, and she told them something that, to anyone who understands domestic violence, is a warning of the highest order. She told them that he had strangled her. Hold on to that word, because we will come back to it. Because of what she had lived through, Ersilia did the brave and necessary thing. She filed for divorce. She left the home she had shared with Emilio and moved in with her parents, back into the house where she had grown up, seeking the safety of the people who loved her most. Emilio Matarazzo did not respond by letting her go. He responded by trying to pull her back. He sent her chocolates. He sent an apology letter. He sent a check for $20,000, as though her safety and her freedom were things he could simply purchase. Ersilia sent the check back, and on the evening of the 18th of December, he appeared at a Christmas party at the very parish where she worked, the one she had helped organize. He was angry. He demanded to see her, and she slipped away to avoid him. When people asked him to leave, he shoved his own daughter on his way out the door. That night, Ersilia told the people she loved that she was afraid. She told them she thought he was going to kill her. The next morning, the 19th of December, 2018, just after 8:30, Ersilia was sitting in her car in her parents' driveway on Central Avenue, about to leave for work. She never pulled out. A neighbor heard gunshots, looked out, and saw a man walk up to the car, raise a shotgun to the window, and fire. It was Emilio. He killed her there, in the driveway of her childhood home, the very place she had gone to be safe. The shotgun had come from the gun safe in his own home, and he would later try to hide it behind a workbench in a basement. About 10 minutes after the shooting, Emilio called their son and, according to prosecutors, said only, "What is done is done." Roughly 2 hours later, he walked into a police station and turned himself in. In August of 2023, after a trial in Middlesex Superior Court, a jury convicted Emilio Matarazzo of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. I asked you to hold on to one word from Ersilia's story, and here is why. When she finally disclosed the abuse, she said that her husband had strangled her. Of all the warning signs in a violent relationship, that one may be the most dangerous and the most misunderstood. Non-fatal strangulation, when a partner puts their hands to another person's throat and cuts off their air, even once, even for only a few seconds, is one of the strongest predictors that exists that the same partner may go on to kill. The research on this is stark. One major study, from the same body of work behind the danger assessment, found that a woman who has been strangled by her partner is more than 7 times as likely to later be killed by that partner. Think about that. Not slightly more likely, 7 times. This is not a fight that went too far. It is not an argument. It is a rehearsal and a message. In that one moment, the person doing it is showing you that they believe they hold the power to decide whether you live or die. So this is what Ersilia's story asks of us. If you ever learn that someone has been choked or strangled by their partner, do not file it away as just one bad night. Understand it for what it is, a flashing red light, a sign that the danger has already reached the edge of lethal. Treat it as the emergency it is. Ersilia Cataldo Matarazzo spent her whole life showing up for other people, in her parish, in her city, in her family. When she finally found the courage to speak the truth and reach for her own safety, she went home, to her parents, to the very beginning. She should have been safe there. The community that leaned on her for so long now carries her forward, in its memory and in the warning her story leaves behind, so that the next person who says the word strangled is heard and believed and protected in time. Case 6, Shen. Imagine discovering that your own husband has hidden cameras inside your home, watching your every move. One woman lived that, and she saw the danger so clearly that, before she was ever harmed, she told the people she loved exactly how to read her death, so that no lie could ever hide it. There are victims whose stories we have to piece together from the silence they left behind. Shen is not one of them, because before she died, she told us exactly what was happening to her. She told her friends, she told her lawyer. She said the words out loud, and in doing so, she left behind something rare and devastating. The truth, in her own voice, waiting for the day someone would finally listen. Shen was 49 years old, a woman living in Lexington, Massachusetts, and by the spring of 2019, she was doing one of the bravest things a person in her position can do. She was leaving. She and her husband, Hong-Yan-sun, were in the middle of a divorce. Just 2 days before the end, she met with a new attorney and decided to take a stronger, more assertive approach to freeing herself. She was moving toward her own life. She was almost there. But to understand the danger she was in, you have to understand the kind of marriage she was trying to escape. From the outside, there may have been nothing to see. That is the quiet cruelty of what investigators would later uncover. Over the course of the marriage, Sun had grown more and more controlling. He was verbally abusive, and he had done something that reveals, better than almost any detail I know, the mind of a man who needs to possess another person. He had hidden cameras inside their own home so that he could watch his wife in secret, in the one place she was supposed to feel safest. He was also quietly siphoning her money, moving funds from her private accounts and their shared accounts into his own. She was being watched. She was being drained. She was living inside a cage she could not always see. And she knew. That is what breaks your heart about Shen. She was not naive. Days before her death, she told a friend something no person should ever have reason to say. She said that if she was ever found dead, it would be a homicide, not a suicide. She was telling the people she loved, in advance, do not believe the story you may be told. Believe me. On the 28th of May, 2019, inside their Lexington home, that fear became real. After a violent struggle, Hong-Yan-sun beat his wife and then strangled her. And then he did something calculated and cold. He tried to build a lie around her body. He carried her out to her own car, a white Honda parked on a public street a short distance from their home, and he staged her there, arranged to look like something other than what it was. He went to work late that morning, buying himself the window of time he needed. He wanted the world to find her and wonder. He wanted a mystery. But Shen had already solved it for us. Her words to her friend now pointed straight at the truth, and the truth kept surfacing. Surveillance footage showed that her car had been placed on that street within a narrow window of time that only he could account for. He carried injuries across his hands and body from the struggle, wounds that matched hers. Forensic evidence tied him to the scene, to her body, and even to his own office. When reporters first approached him, he told them not to ask him what happened, but the evidence was already answering. On the 3rd of February 2023, a jury found Hong-Yan-sun guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The story he tried to stage never held for a moment. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. Not all abuse leaves a mark you can see. Some of the most dangerous control a person can live under is quiet, surveillance, isolation, the slow theft of money and freedom and privacy until a person is fenced in on every side. Hidden cameras are not love, and they are not jealousy. They are ownership. And when control tightens like that, especially as someone finally tries to leave, the danger climbs to its very highest. Shen understood her situation with perfect, terrible clarity, and she did the one thing she still could. She told people. She said, "If I am found dead, do not believe the lie." So here is what her story asks of us. When someone tells you they are afraid of the person closest to them, that fear is not drama, and it is not paranoia. More often than not, it is the most accurate reading of the danger that anyone will ever have. Believe it the first time, and help them get it written down while there is still time to act on it. Shen saw the truth of her own life clearly, and she had the courage to say it out loud while she still could. She did not reach the future she was so close to touching, but she left behind the one thing her husband could never stage over or explain away, her own voice, telling the people she loved exactly what to believe. He tried to author the ending of her story. She had already written the truth of it first. Case 7. Vanessa Masucci. When a judge with 40 years on the bench says a crime is the most extreme she has ever seen, it stops you cold. But prosecutors said the horror of this case began with something quieter and hidden. A secret, they argued, was draining everything the couple had. To the children in her second-grade classroom at the Connery Elementary School in Lynn, Massachusetts, she was simply Miss Masucci, the teacher who made them feel safe and seen and capable. Vanessa Masucci was 30 years old, and she had built her life around caring for other people's children. She was, by every account of those who knew her, warm, devoted, and deeply loved. She was also a mother herself, to a little girl who was just 1 year old. As we tell you the story of what happened to Vanessa, we ask you to hold on to who she was, because she was so much more than the crime that took her. On the 23rd of September 2017, Vanessa Masucci was found dead inside the Revere home she shared with her husband, Andrew McCormack. She had been murdered, and the violence done to her was so extreme that the judge who later presided over the case noted she had not seen such severity in 40 years in the justice system. The people who loved her found her. Their world ended that day. Now, here is where we ask you to listen carefully, because this case must be told with precision. Andrew McCormack was charged with his wife's murder, and from the very beginning, he has insisted that he did not do it. The prosecution laid out a theory of why. They told the jury that the marriage was under strain, that there were mounting financial problems, and that Andrew had an unacknowledged drug habit that was draining the couple's money. They said that Vanessa had confronted him about the missing funds, and had told him she would seek a divorce if he did not change. Prosecutors argued that this was a killing born of that pressure. They pointed to evidence they said tied him to the crime and to that motive, including forged checks drawn on Vanessa's own bank account, a knife missing from the couple's kitchen, and the couple's wedding rings. Both of Vanessa's had disappeared, and Andrew had pawned his own for a fraction of its worth. That was the case the Commonwealth presented. Andrew McCormack told a different story. He denied any involvement. He said he had been clean from drugs for years, and he denied that the marriage was in trouble. At his sentencing, he stood before the court and said, plainly, "I did not murder her." He insisted that the real killer was still out there, and that the investigation had been done, in his words, with blinders on. The jury weighed all of it, and after nearly a full week of deliberation, in November of 2019, they found Andrew McCormack guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He appealed to the highest court in Massachusetts, the Supreme Judicial Court, arguing that the verdict should be overturned. In 2023, that court reviewed the entire record and affirmed his conviction, finding no error that would justify a new trial. In the eyes of the law, the question of who killed Vanessa Masucci is settled. Andrew McCormack continues, to this day, to say that he is innocent. Here is our observation. and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. We hold to the verdict of the jury and the ruling of the courts, and we also tell you honestly that the man they convicted maintains he did not do it. What we can speak to, carefully, is the pattern the prosecution described, because it is one that appears in case after case, whatever the truth of any single heart. Addiction is one of the most corrosive forces a relationship can face. When substance abuse takes hold, it can hollow out a household's finances, its trust, and its stability. And in relationships that already contain abuse, it is strongly associated with escalation, with the danger climbing higher and faster. That does not mean addiction causes murder. The vast majority of people who struggle with it never harm anyone. But when it burns alongside control and jealousy and threats, it acts as an accelerant on a fire that is already lit. So if there is something to carry from the account the Commonwealth put before that jury, it is this. When addiction and domestic tension are rising together under the same roof, the risk is rising with them, and that is the moment to reach for help and for safety before the pressure finds its most terrible release. Vanessa Masucci deserved to grow old watching her own daughter learn to read, the way she taught so many other children too. She deserved decades more of the classroom she loved and the students who adored her. The courts have said, who is responsible for the fact that she will never have them? Whatever that man chooses to say from his cell, the truest thing the record leaves us belongs to her, and not to him. A gentle woman who gave her short life to children was taken from a world that was better for having had her in it. Case 8, Jillian Tatro. Society keeps asking why victims of abuse do not simply leave. Here is the truth almost no one says out loud. The most dangerous moment of a woman's life is not while she stays. It is the moment she finally tries to go. Jillian Tatro had made up her mind. After everything she had endured, the 38-year-old mother of two had reached the decision that so many people in her situation find almost impossibly hard to reach. She was going to leave. She even had the day in mind. The following Tuesday, she would be gone, out of the reach of the man who had been hurting her, moving toward a safer life for herself and her children. She was so close to it. She could see it. She just had to get through the next few days. She did not get through them. The man Jillian was preparing to leave was her husband, Luis Rosado. Theirs had been a fast relationship. They started dating in the fall of 2021 and married just a few months later, at the very start of 2022. But behind that quick beginning, investigators would later confirm domestic violence had been a long-running part of the marriage. By that spring, Jillian had seen enough, and she was getting out. Just days before her death, on the 24th of May, she texted Rosado directly and told him the truth. She did not want to be around him and his drug use any longer, and she intended to file for divorce. On the night of the 28th of May, 2022, inside Jillian's second-floor apartment on Charles Street in North Adams, Luis Rosado attacked her, and he killed her, with a savagery the court would later describe as extreme cruelty. It happened in a narrow window of minutes. A neighbor downstairs heard the two of them inside the apartment as she left for work, at around 10:15, and then, less than half an hour later, Jillian's adult son arrived at the building and saw Rosado walking away from it. When he asked after his mother, Rosado looked him in the eye and lied. He said Jillian had already gone out with a friend. Reassured by the very man who had just killed her, the son went home. It was not until the following evening, when he still could not reach his mother, that her son returned to the apartment and found her. And in a detail that says everything about the life Jillian was fighting for, she was found holding an envelope from a law firm, the paperwork of the escape she was only days from making. Her son would later sit in a courtroom and testify to all of it, an act of composure and courage that the district attorney singled out for praise. A man who lost his mother to this violence found the strength to help hold her killer accountable. For 4 long years, that accountability was still ahead. It was not until May of 2026 that a Berkshire County jury found Luis Rosado guilty of murder in the first degree, with extreme atrocity. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. As happens with every first-degree murder conviction in Massachusetts, the case now moves to the state's highest court for the automatic review the law requires. That review is underway. His life sentence remains fully in force. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. Across many of the stories in this series, a single thread keeps reappearing, and here it stands at the very center. The most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is not always when the abuse is at its worst. It is the moment the victim decides to leave. The district attorney in Jillian's case said it plainly, that the most dangerous time in a domestic violence victim's life is when they are preparing to go. And the reason is as chilling as it is simple. For an abuser, the violence has always been about control, and nothing threatens that control like a partner walking out the door. The act of leaving, the very thing we rightly beg victims to do, is also the moment an abuser is most likely to escalate to murder, because in his mind, if he cannot have power over her, he will seize the only power he has left. Jillian Tatro was killed days before her planned escape. This is why leaving is not a single brave act, but the most dangerous stretch of the whole journey, and why it should never be done alone. If you love someone who is trying to leave an abuser, this is the moment they need you most. A safety plan, a shelter, the police, people who know. Because the door out is also the point of greatest danger, and no one should have to walk through it unprotected. Jillian Tatro had already done the hardest thing. She had looked at a life of fear and decided that she deserved better, and she had chosen the very day she would claim it. She did not get to see that Tuesday. But let it be said clearly, she was not weak, and she was not trapped. She was leaving. The failure was never hers. It belongs entirely to the man who could not bear to let her go, and to a truth we have to keep saying out loud. That the most dangerous door a survivor ever walks toward is the one that leads to freedom. Case 9. Celeste Marte Lebrun. Celeste Marte Lebrun was 49 years old, a wife and a woman of the city of Lowell, living a life that, from the outside, may have looked ordinary. But inside her marriage, Celeste carried a weight that few people could see. Her husband was a man whose need to control her and to possess her had been growing darker for a long time. And on the last night she would ever spend in her own home, in the middle of a horror almost too great to speak of, Celeste Marte Lebrun would do something so brave that it reached past her own death and made certain the truth was told. The man she had married was Santos Lebrun de los Santos. By the accounts that would later come out in court, theirs was a marriage shadowed by his controlling behavior and by his threats. And at the center of it was a corrosive, consuming suspicion. He had convinced himself that Celeste was being unfaithful to him. Whether there was any truth at all to that accusation does not matter, and I want to be very clear about why. But first, you need to know what his jealousy led him to do. On the night of the 31st of March, 2021, in their home on Varnum Street in Lowell, Santos Lebrun de los Santos followed his wife into the bathroom, where she lay in the bath, trapped and defenseless, and there, driven by his accusations of infidelity, he set her on fire. It is one of the most horrifying acts of violence in this entire series, and we are not going to dwell on its details, because Celeste deserves far better than to be remembered only for the cruelty done to her. What she deserves to be remembered for is what she did next. Gravely injured, Celeste got herself out of that house. She made it to a neighbor, and with what strength she had left, she did not stay silent, and she did not protect the man who had done this to her. She told that neighbor the truth. She said that her husband had set her on fire, after accusing her of being unfaithful. In that moment, in unimaginable pain, she named her killer. And Santos, rather than help her, tried to stop the neighbor from helping and tried to pull his wife back toward the house. He never called for help. It was someone else who called 911. Celeste Marte Lebrun fought for 3 weeks. On the 20th of April 2021, she died of her injuries, but because of what she had said, in her very worst moment, the truth was already secured. Santos, for his part, tried to bury it. He hid the gas can he had used in the back of his truck under his tools. He gave investigators a shifting series of stories, calling it a joke, calling it a scare tactic, blaming faulty wiring. None of it held. State fire investigators reconstructed what had truly happened, and it matched exactly what Celeste had told her neighbor with her dying voice. In March of 2024, a Middlesex County jury found Santos Lebron de los Santos guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. At that trial, Celeste's daughter, Juliana Paniagua, took the witness stand. She told the jury that her mother had been her best friend. She had sat by Celeste's hospital bedside through those final weeks, and she made certain, in the hardest way a daughter ever could, that the jury would see the truth of what had been done to her mother and would not be allowed to look away. A young woman who lost her best friend became one of the voices that helped hold her mother's killer accountable. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. Earlier, I told you it does not matter whether Celeste was actually unfaithful, and here is why that matters so much. In the mind of a violently possessive partner, the truth is beside the point. Their jealousy is not really about love, and it is not about loyalty, it is about ownership. A person who believes they own their partner comes to feel betrayed by that partner's independence itself, and will punish a mere suspicion as though it were a crime. And you can see that ownership at work in the most chilling moment of this whole story. When Celeste, gravely hurt, broke free and ran for help, Santos's first instinct was not panic, and it was not remorse. It was retrieval. He tried to drag her back toward the house. Even as she fled for her life, he could not bear his possession getting away from him. This is why extreme obsessive jealousy is one of the most reliable warning signs of lethal danger there is. A partner who constantly monitors, accuses, rages, and treats you as a possession is telling you something true about themselves, no matter how calm the rest of the relationship may look from the outside. And let this be heard clearly by anyone who needs it. If a partner's jealousy has ever made you feel afraid, you have done nothing wrong. Their suspicion is not your failing, it is their warning sign. And nothing you could ever do, or fail to do, would make what happened to Celeste anything other than the sole and total responsibility of the man who did it. Celeste Marte Lebron was failed by the one person who had promised to love her. But in the last hours she could still speak. She refused to let him take the truth as well. She used her voice to name him, and that voice, even after she was gone, was strong enough to help lock her killer away for the rest of his life. What he tried to erase, she made certain would be known. That was her final act, and it was an act of extraordinary courage. Case 10. Karen Sharpe. By the summer of the year 2000, Karen Sharpe had done the hardest and bravest thing of her life. She had gotten out. She was 44 years old. She and her husband, Richard Sharpe, had been together since they were teenagers, married back in 1973, more than a quarter of a century before. To the outside world, they looked like a portrait of success. Richard was a wealthy and prominent dermatologist, a man who had taught at Harvard Medical School and built businesses worth millions. But behind the walls of that success, Karen had spent years enduring a husband who abused her. And in the year 2000, she decided she would endure it no longer. That February, Karen moved out of the marital home. She took her children and started over in a new house in the town of Wenham. She was rebuilding. And she did not just walk away quietly. She used every tool the law gave her. In March, the divorce was underway. In May, Karen stood before a judge and, in a sworn affidavit describing what her husband had done to her, she obtained an abuse prevention order against him, a restraining order meant to keep him away. Weeks later, she returned to court, and the order was extended. Karen Sharpe was doing everything right. She was leaving. She was documenting. She was seeking the protection of the courts. On paper, she was as protected as the system knew how to make her. But a piece of paper cannot stop a bullet. Prosecutors would later say that what enraged Richard Sharpe was money, that he could not stand the thought of losing millions of dollars in the divorce. On the night of the 14th of July, 2000, he came to Karen's home in Wenham, and in the front hall of the house she had made into a refuge, in front of her own brother and others who had gathered there, Richard Sharpe raised a high-powered rifle and shot her, a single shot. Karen was rushed to the hospital, but nothing could be done. The restraining order was still in effect. It had not saved her. Richard Sharpe fled, and his flight set off a manhunt that made national news. 2 days later, a motel clerk in rural New Hampshire recognized his face from a news broadcast and called it in, and he was arrested. At trial, Sharpe did not deny pulling the trigger. Instead, he claimed he had been insane, that he had not been responsible for what he did. But prosecutors argued that this was no breakdown and no sudden loss of control. It was a calculated killing, they said, planned after Karen left him, and his mental illness was in large part a performance, symptoms exaggerated to escape responsibility. The jury agreed with the prosecution. In November of 2001, Richard Sharpe was convicted of first-degree murder, which in Massachusetts requires deliberate premeditation, and of violating the very order that was meant to protect his wife. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. He would never be released. He died in prison in 2009. Here is our observation, and it is a reflection, not a legal finding. Karen Sharpe's story forces us to look at one of the single most dangerous factors in all of intimate partner violence. And it is not a behavior. It is an object. It is a gun. When there is a firearm in the home of an abusive relationship, the risk that the abuse will end in death rises sharply. The research, from the same body of work behind the danger assessment, found that an abuser's access to a gun makes a woman more than 5 times as likely to be killed. This is not a political statement. It is one of the most consistent findings in the entire study of domestic violence, and it is what makes Karen's story so hard to bear. She had done everything we tell victims to do. She left. She filed. She stood in a courtroom and swore out the truth. She held in her hand an order from a judge commanding her husband to stay away. But an order is a boundary made of words, and a gun does not read. And we have to understand what that boundary means to a violently controlling partner. An abuser who is losing their grip can see a restraining order not as a deterrent, but as proof that they have lost control, a challenge to the ownership they felt over their partner. And for one who has a gun, the gun becomes the way to seize that control back. The gap in Karen's protection was not her courage, and it was not the court's willingness to act. It was that nothing in that process took the weapon out of her abuser's hands. So this is what her story asks of us. When we wonder whether someone in an abusive relationship is safe, we have to ask one more question. Is there a gun? Because the presence of that one object can turn abuse into a death sentence, no matter how many things a victim does right. Karen Sharpe spent the last months of her life fighting her way toward freedom, and she very nearly reached it. She found the courage to leave a man she had known since girlhood, to protect her children, to stand in the light of a courtroom and name what had been done to her in the dark. The failure was never hers. She did everything a person could do. What she could not do, alone, was take the weapon out of the hands of a man who had decided that if he could not keep her, no one would. We have just walked through 10 harrowing stories from across Massachusetts, each ending in an unimaginable loss. As we step back from these individual tragedies, a broader, critical truth emerges about the nature of intimate partner violence. The most vital psychological takeaway we can leave you with is this. Abuse is rarely a sudden loss of control. It is the meticulous, calculated assertion of it. Whether an abuser relies on physical intimidation, financial manipulation, or digital surveillance, the underlying goal is absolute ownership. If there is one lesson to carry forward, it is to always trust your internal alarm system. If you feel fear in your own home, or if your independence is treated as a trigger for your partner's rage, you are not overreacting. Your fear is a valid, life-saving instinct. Listen to it. To the families of Anna, Quitiza, Shana, Christina, Ersilia, Shen, Vanessa, Jillian, Celeste, and Karen. We know that a life sentence does not bring your loved ones back. We honor the mothers, children, siblings, and friends who sat in courtrooms, stared down these perpetrators, and fought for the truth. You carried the weight of unimaginable grief and transformed it into undeniable justice. Their legacies live on through your remarkable strength. We must also extend our deepest gratitude to the people who build that justice. To the 911 dispatchers who answered those terrifying final calls. To the investigators and forensic teams who refused to accept easy lies, piecing together the truth from digital searches, hidden cameras, and discarded evidence. To the local media who kept these women's names in the public eye. And, crucially, to the juries who sat through weeks of devastating testimony, seeing past the perpetrators' excuses of insanity, intoxication, or sudden panic to ensure that these men were held fully accountable. True justice is never guaranteed. It is achieved by people who simply refuse to look the other way. Finally, thank you, our viewers. By giving these stories your time and empathy, you help dismantle the silence that abusers rely on to operate. Awareness is the first step toward prevention. If you or someone you love is navigating a dangerous relationship, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can call 1-800-799-7233 or text the word START to 88788. There is help and there is a way out. Please like this video, subscribe to Unforeseen Fates, and share this episode so this vital awareness can reach those who might need it most. Until next time, take care of yourselves and look out for one another.